This is RTE Radio 1. It's 10 o'clock.
Tonight with Vincent Browne on the programme this evening, Joe MacAnthony, who was maybe Ireland's finest investigative journalist, but who felt forced to leave Ireland in the 1970s. But first, over to the newsroom for the 10 o'clock news.
Thank you, Vincent. Good evening. The government has adopted a report on salmon conservation which recommends ending drift netting by next January. The Minister for the Marine, Noel Dempsey, is to set up a hardship fund of €30 million for fishermen affected by the ban. Our political correspondent, David Davenport.
In the end, Noel Dempsey convinced his cabinet colleagues to accept the recommendations of an expert group. Their key proposals will see an end to drift netting next year and a compensation fund of some €30 million for the fishermen involved and their communities. They marched through Dublin to the Dáil this afternoon, but the die had already been cast in cabinet. Outside Leinster House, they were addressed by Fine Gael's John Perry, among others. He said the decision was a disgrace, but in an Oireachtas committee later, Labour's Tommy Brewin broadly welcomed the move, which was also backed by the Greens. Fianna Fáil backbenchers Brendan Kennelly and Denis O'Donovan, though, said they were very disappointed. The decision was criticised by Sinn Féin's Martin Ferris. The chairman of the expert group, Pádraig White, said they had great sympathy with the salmon fishermen, but had no alternative but to recommend an end to drift netting. David Davenport, RTE News, Leinster House.
6 men, including the man known as Mr. C, have been brought before the Dublin District Court to face new charges of sexual assault after charges of unlawful carnal knowledge against them were dropped. It follows the striking down of statutory rape legislation. Will Goodbody reports.
Last May, the Supreme Court found the law governing unlawful carnal knowledge to be unconstitutional because it failed to allow for a defence of mistaken age. The Supreme Court decision left Mr. C, the man who brought the challenge, and at least 5 other men charged with the offence in a legal limbo. Yesterday, having considered the implications of the ruling, the Director of Public Prosecutions applied to the Dublin Circuit Criminal Court for the withdrawal of the 4 charges against Mr. C. This morning, having considered the matter, Judge Brian McMahon granted that application, saying he could see no reason in legal history not to grant it. Judge McMahon also agreed to such nolle prosequis in the cases of 5 other men charged with the same offence. The 6 men then left the court precinct, but were almost immediately rearrested by Gardaí and brought to the Dublin District Court. There, throughout the day, all 6 men, including Mr. C, were charged with sexual assault. They were all granted bail and will now go forward for trial before the Dublin Circuit Criminal Court. Will Goodbody, RTE News, at the Dublin District Court.
Following talks with the northern parties, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, has announced a £50 billion package over 10 years, which would follow final agreement on a power-sharing executive in the north. It includes a 4-year public service spending commitment, rising from £8 billion a year to over £9 billion in 2011. There's also another £18 billion investment provision for areas such as roads, health, schools and third-level education. Welcoming the announcement, the Taoiseach said it was another significant step forward towards a lasting settlement.
RTE Radio 1 weather with Dimplex Home Heating. Whatever the weather, you'll stay warm with Dimplex. Energy-efficient solutions from Dimplex, today and every day.
And the forecast cold overnight with sharp or severe frost with lowest temperatures of +2 to -3 degrees. Some mist and fog developing also. Frost clearing tomorrow morning and mist and fog lifting. Good sunny spells developing. Temperatures rising to between 10 and 12 Celsius in the afternoon with little or no breeze. That's the news and weather. Now the sports report. Here's Damien O'Mara.
Many thanks, Ken. A very good evening. It's soccer to begin, where there were another 8 games up for decision in the Champions League tonight. Particular attention from these shores on Group E. A comprehensive defeat to report for Celtic away to Benfica tonight. 3-0 the final score. An own goal from Gary Caldwell and a strike each from Nuno Gomez and Kariaka doing the damage. Defeat on the road also for Manchester United, who went down 1-0 to FC Copenhagen. The former Aston Villa striker Marcus Alback on target there after 73 minutes. Those results mean that United finish on top of the group tonight with 9 points. Celtic and Benfica, or Celtic rather, with 6, Benfica and Copenhagen with 4 points each. Arsenal held to a scoreless draw at home in Group G by CSKA Moscow. The second game in that group saw Hamburg beaten 3-1 at home by FC Porto. CSKA with 8 points are now a point clear of Arsenal and FC Porto. Hamburg without a point registered after 4 games. Elsewhere in Group E, it finished Lyon 1, Dinamo Kiev 0, while Real Madrid beat Steaua Bucharest by the same scoreline. That means Lyon and Madrid are the only two sides to have booked their place in the knockout stages after tonight's action. 2 games to report on in Group H, AC Milan 4, Anderlecht 1, with AEK Athens beating Lille by a goal to 0. At home, a fresh turn in the race for the Aircom League Premier Division title, with the appeals board of the FAI today ruling that Bohemians and Shells must replay their game originally played in August. Bohs won that league meeting by 2-1, but fielded the suspended Jason McGuinness and were subsequently docked 3 points. Shells had appealed the punishment, claiming they should have been awarded the game. It'll now be replayed, but the points deduction against Bohs will stand. In rugby, Ireland coach Eddie O'Sullivan today named a 22-man squad for the first autumn international test against South Africa at Lansdowne Road on Saturday week. No place in the squad for the Leinster winger Dennis Hickey, while Frankie Sheehan of Munster has been recalled. Brian Young, Isaac Boss and Paddy Wallace of Ulster have also been included in the selection. Finally to racing, where Sky's the Limit finished third on his fencing debut in today's beginners chase at Punchestown. Edward O'Grady's charge was sent off the 13-8 favourite, but victory went to the 9-1 shot Schindler's Hunt, trained by Desi Hughes. That is it from the sports department for now. A full roundup of all Wednesday's news in the late sport just after midnight.
In the last few days, I got a DVD of an interview that Joe MacAnthony did with Bob Quinn, the filmmaker and former authority member of RTE, and in which Joe MacAnthony spoke about his life in journalism in Ireland in the 1970s and how he felt forced to leave Ireland because he wasn't getting any work from any of the major media institutions. And we thought we'd have him on the programme this evening to talk about his work as an investigative journalist and why he felt that he had to leave Ireland. Joe MacAnthony is in a studio in Toronto in Canada. Joe, tell us a bit about your background first of all.
Well, I was born in Dublin off South Circular Road by the canal there. I went to Sink Street, and from Sink Street I went into the army. I spent a year in the 1st Western Battalion, Cape Cahan, and I spent almost a year in the Cadet College. And from that then, I went briefly to England, then worked in the Library of the Irish Times, and a whole series of things followed from that.
You worked briefly in RTE in the late 1960s? That's
right, yeah. I worked for Home Truths, actually. I used to do the legal side of it, you know, and at the time by then I was working in Navan Carpets. I was the marketing manager there. And I was doing your legal rights on Home Truths. And
Home Truths was a consumer program,
which
right. Was a very tough and investigative program, and it was on the air for how long?
It didn't last like any other of the investigative programs, but I think I started in it in 67, and I think it was gone by maybe 69.
Who was involved in that program? Who was the presenter?
The presenter was a girl named Mary Murphy, who was fabulous, and then Jack Dowling was a producer there.
Yeah, Jack Dowling was a very well-known producer who left RTE sometime in the late 60s, right. And along with Leila Doolin wrote a book.
Sit Down and Be Counted.
That's right.
Yeah.
But in any event, you worked with Home Truths.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And kind of the wheels fell off for me in the outside world. I wasn't really a journalist at that time. I was only doing this thing part-time. And one evening I did a show a piece on This Is Your Right. You know, that if you bought some goods and they weren't up to standard, what could you do? And so I told people they could go and get their money back. And I said, and if they say to you, we'll exchange it for some other goods, I said, you have the right to say no. I said, why buy more of the rotten goods? And very unfortunately, Navan Carpets had just negotiated a big deal with a dissatisfied customer who was persuaded to take more carpet instead of his money back. And he saw me on television, and he immediately called them, without knowing I worked in Navan Carpets, called them and demanded his money back. So they gave me notice. So the interesting thing here, and I always like to mention this story, is that when this happened, I was invited by the people out in RTE to come and speak to them after lunch. Out there were a lot of people talking radical talk at the time. And I went out and I told them what happened, that I'd lost my job and so on. And they all were commiserated greatly. And then after lunch, they all faded away. And there was only one guy left. And he came forward to me and he said, look, I realize you have a family and so on, and you don't have anything. He said, I have £1,000 in my budget. And if you want it, it's yours. And the man who said that was Gay Byrne, the only one out there who came forward and did something,
And you worked on the Late Late Show then for a while?
I worked on the Late Late Show for a year, I think, something like that, yeah.
And then?
Well, what happened eventually, Louis McRedmond hired me in the Irish Independent.
He was editor of the Irish Independent.
That's right, yeah. And I started doing investigative stuff at that point. Not very extensive, but some investigative stuff. And then I started working in This Week. I did a thing, I remember one time, on P.V. Doyle.
This Week was a current affairs weekly magazine.
That's
published by Hugh McLaughlin, who died earlier this year, I think.
Yeah. And Joe O'Malley was the editor.
That's right.
There.
He's
very
the current,
good editor.
He's the current political correspondent of the Sunday Independent.
That's right. That's
brother
right.
of Des O'Malley.
Yeah. I did a thing on the Rathfarnham Shopping Centre, and how P.V. Doyle had managed to break every rule in the book in getting it done, And indeed, there is a road running across Rathfarnham Road, which was put in to facilitate him. The whole thing was done to advance his particular needs. So I did this article, and at the end of it, I said, when I phoned for a comment from Mr. Doyle, he wasn't available. His secretary said he was in Las Vegas. And he took great offence at this. And
he took great offence at what?
At the idea that I was kind of inferring that he'd made such a great amount of money that he went off to Las Vegas to enjoy it,
But this is what you've been told by his secretary?
Yeah, that he was away, yeah.
All right, and you were working for the This Week magazine at the time?
That's right. So I left This Week and went back to the Sunday Independent. And Conor O'Brien was the editor there.
He had previously been editor of the Irish Press, and he was a great editor.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Evening Press, yeah.
That's right.
Then he had transferred over to Independent Newspapers, so became editor of the Sunday Independent, yeah.
That's right. And a wonderful, he was a great editor. He was genuinely committed to good journalism, to trying to get matters dealt with that weren't normally dealt with in Ireland in newspapers and that at the time.
He was a lovely, educated, refined gentleman, wasn't
he? Absolutely, yeah. And he encouraged me to start writing, investigative stuff. I think the first one I did was a man who was in Limerick prison, who had been jailed under a contempt of court order because he was barred, I think, from going into, I forget the town, but he was barred from going in there, and they put him in jail, and the judge died, and the father who had taken out the injunction died, and he was just left to rot in the jail. So that was the first story I did. They released him a week later, which was nice.
And then what was the first major investigative story you did for the Sunday Independent at the time?
Well, I did phone tapping. I did a lot of different stories of different types. I did stories on the IRA, gun running, the Claudia, things like that. Lots of things like that. I did a lot in the north, in Derry mostly through from 68 onwards. It was a primary job.
And then, what year was it that you got involved in writing the story on the Irish Hospital sweepstakes?
It was about, I think it was 71 or 72. But Connor said to me, why don't you do a story on the sweeps? And I said, really, I don't know what's there. He said, well, have a look. And I looked through, and in fact, it was amazing. There were no critical stories of the sweep.
Joe, before you go on, some of our listeners may not remember what the sweepstakes was, so just tell them.
The Irish sweepstakes was a lottery which was started in 1930 by a group of men, actually 2 English bookies and Joe McGrath, and it got the support of the Irish government in allowing them to set up shop in Ireland and export illegal tickets around the world. So they were selling tickets illegally in about 146 countries. I think that was the number they stated. And they were making vast sums of money, and the purpose as laid down in legislation was to aid the hospitals. But in fact, as it turned out, the hospitals were getting less than 10% of the take. Eventually, I mean, they bled off money and profits and expenses.
Okay, tell how that happened. They had first made an application to the Irish government to run a lottery.
That's right.
In the early 1920s.
Yes. Well, they tried early in the 1920s and failed. And the reason they failed was because Kevin O'Higgins, who was Minister for Justice, was absolutely opposed to any lottery of this sort. He claimed that he was getting pneumonia from the dampness in his office from all these promoters weeping about the poor and how they could aid the poor. And O'Higgins was intractable on this. He said there will be no lottery as long as I'm here. And he said that something of that nature in 1923-24. In 1927 he was shot. And after that the lottery cranked up. The lottery kind of promotional thing that the government cranked up. Cosgrave wanted to do it all the time.
That's W.T. Cosgrave, father of Liam Cosgrave, who later became Taoiseach.
Yeah. He was really part of making that lottery a reality.
He was
Taoiseach.
Into a horse. Yeah, he was into horse racing like his son was.
Yes.
But you mentioned Joe McGrath was involved along with 2 English bookies. Who was Joe McGrath?
Joe McGrath was a man who had been Director of Intelligence. Directors of Intelligence are always kind of odd people who turn out to make a lot of money. But in this particular case, he was a Director of Intelligence for Michael Collins. He became a minister in the Free State government. And he was involved at a point where the part of the army mutinied, and McGrath supported that section of the army and left government as a result. So he had no money, but he met up with a guy called Duggan, who was a bookie. His nickname was Dirty Dick Duggan. And Duggan was running illegal lotteries. And holding the draw in places in Switzerland, and people with a box office number in Egypt might win first prize, that kind of thing. and so McGrath kind of lined up with him, and then the man who stopped it then was O'Higgins. And after O'Higgins was died, McGrath and the others cranked it up again. And Cosgrave had always been a supporter of McGrath in this. And so he managed to maneuver it through the Dáil. And they set up the thing, and it was incredible. The money started rolling in, because it was probably the first time ever that a lottery had the backing of a government in the manner this one had. And even though it was illegal in the States and Britain and everywhere else, the Irish government was standing over it, you know, and even sending the commissioner to draw the tickets. So it was...
the commissioner, yeah.
Yeah. So it was really, it couldn't have survived at all without this backing. And on the first sweeps, there was a bookie, his son told me, the bookie told him about this, that he was called to come on over, we're having a great time here. And he went over to the celebration they were having at the sweep. And the floor, he said, there was so much money on the tables that they had to put it all on the floors as well. It was just rolling in money. And I talked to a painter who was painting the upstairs rooms for them, and he said, I came across a whole lot of bags filled with tickets which never got into the drum. They had no room in the drum to fit the tickets, so a good many of the people who bought tickets never even had a chance in the draw, you know. So that was the kind of underground thing. I mean, the thing was being run, not just... Joe McGrath was kind of the front man in the early stages, but two bookies in England, and Spencer Freeman's brother. Spencer Freeman was the head of publicity in the sweep. His brother put him in there to look after his particular interest, you know. And these bookies were very experienced in illegal lotteries, and they had lists of addresses in England and elsewhere. And you couldn't run a lottery, an illegal lottery, without addresses of prospective people. And they had tens of thousands of addresses. So for their participation, they supplied the addresses.
What was the point of supplying the addresses?
Because they'd send tickets out to them.
Oh, I see, yeah. And were they real people?
Oh, they were, yeah. But the tickets would all go out. And here was another beautiful thing in it. I mean, the thing itself, the lottery itself, because of this illegal aspect, they didn't give the names of people. They gave them nom-de-plumes. So that you never really knew if they were real people.
Yeah, because somebody winning the lottery in America, for instance, couldn't be identified as a winner because they had taken part in the illegal lottery.
That's right. And
which left the thing open to certain manipulation, really, I suppose.
What else would you think? But they had another way. You see, one of the things, they were taking money coming back and giving kind of agencies to people who did no work for the agencies, families, relations, all kinds of people like that. So they were all getting commissions out of this money coming back in before it actually got to the sweepstakes. You know, I mean, the sweepstakes paid the money without doing any work for it. And then they had another beautiful one. I mean, that was another scheme, you know. And then probably the most beautiful one, I mean, they were skinning the customers to no end. But in this particular one, when there was a draw, and they announced the nom-de-plumes, you know, 3 gentlemen and a blonde, you know, Brooklyn or something like that. Spencer Freeman would then go to the post office and wire his brother, who was waiting in New York, to tell him who were the real people behind nom-de-plumes. And the brother would then race out to these people and offer them 50% for 50%, you know, maybe $5,000 for 50% of their tickets, right?
And why would they sell?
They would sign over. He would produce a legal document which they would sign, giving them 50% of the
But
ticket.
why would they? They wouldn't know that they'd won.
No, this guy, Freeman, would tell them they had drawn a ticket. In other words, he would arrive, say, I've good news for you, you've drawn a ticket. And then when he's got them on that, he says, but, you know, the chances of winning are not high.
Why? If they drew the ticket, surely they win.
No, they only do, when you drew a ticket for a horse.
Oh, a horse, right, yeah.
Yeah, and all those horses were in it, and your horse
Is a horse in some race or other?
Yeah, the Derby, all the major races in England, they ran the sweepstakes on, you know. So that's what they did. So they would buy up half the tickets, you know, where they could, and they did it most of the time.
And what was the prize?
Well, it was about $50,000 as a general rule, $50,000, which was a huge amount of money in the 1930s.
Huge
right?
amount, yeah.
Yeah. So you got $5,000, and you might get less, and you ended up with $25,000, right? That you got half the ticket because you've sold half to the sweeps themselves, right? Yeah. So you then only have 25,000, but your man has bought the ticket, Spencer, the bookie, brother, and he returns to London, and he's gone. And the sucker who gets the 50, gets the 25,000, the half share, can find himself charged with taxes for the whole 100%. So they were skimming him, and he was being skimmed by the FBI and whoever it was investigated. So it was, the whole thing was outrageous, really.
One of the features of it was that the optics of it were wonderful. They had nurses drawing the tickets, didn't they?
That's right.
Apart from the Garda Commissioners, they'd also loads of nurses.
They started off, would you believe, with blind children to create trust. Blind children drew the first tickets in the sweepstakes. Supposedly a blind child couldn't cheat, you know. It's the most pathetic thing.
My God. In any event, you researched this story, and what happened then? Was there difficulties in publishing?
Getting it published? Well, the real problem was the McGraths were very close to the Murphys who owned the independent newspapers. And the result of that was that Connor said, if we tell them...
That's the Murphys, yeah.
Yeah, we'll never get it through. And it was a big story. It ran over pages, you know. He said, and if we don't run it all at once, we'll never get the second half of it in. So he said, we'll run it all, and we won't tell them. So he ran the thing anyway. And the next day, it was said that all hell broke loose between the Murphys and the McGraths, and not so much hell as huge estrangement. And then Connor had to bear with the head of the Murphy family, Major Murphy, who was very upset by the whole thing, but didn't really blame us, you know. But he decided to sell the paper as a result. So here we were. We'd done an investigative report, and the is sold under us. That was the first.
How would he have decided to sell the paper as a consequence?
Because he didn't he wasn't that keen on the kind of endless problems of that the paper caused for him. You know, he was a kind of an older, gentlemanly man. You know. And I presume people would be calling him up and giving out about stories and things like that, you know. But whatever, he wanted to, he wasn't that keen on it, and he seized the opportunity and sold the whole lot to O'Reilly.
Well, just before we get away from the hospital sweepstakes, this is an amazing story, because we've all led to believe that this kind of this phenomenon in Irish politics started maybe in the 60s or into the 70s, or maybe even later still.
Horseshit.
But here it started in the 1920s.
Absolutely.
And the government that was involved in it in the first instance was not a Fianna Fáil government. It was the Common Gael, the predecessors of Fine Gael.
Exactly. You know, and I just had to wonder why they took such effort. I mean, you know, the Duggan was a man who was double bookkeeping. You know, he was a rogue, you know, and he was charged very prominently in 1929, you know, by the revenue. And John A. Costello put every conceivable pressure on to stop his prosecution. And they did manage. And he became a director of the sweepstakes. He became the first director of the first sweepstakes. You know, I mean, and right through, he was the founder, director, notorious guy for doing what he did, you know. And here was Cosgrave going out and canvassing to get this thing through, you know. And once they did get it through, there was a fellow, the head of the Labour Party, a kind of, you know, you think he's wonderful when you read some of his speeches, but he in fact didn't perform, you know. He didn't make any difference in much of what was happening at the time. But he had great pithy phrases, and one of them he said is that they're going to make this so crucial that we won't be able to stop it. And that's exactly what happened. McGrath then started. First of all, he started hiring all his cronies. And there was outrage, you know, that it was all going within. And then he pulled a marvellous one. He started hiring old ladies who were related to people who might have influence or not, you know. So you got lots of old ladies working in the sweeps, maybe 2,000 during a draw. This was very big business at the time. And so here were old ladies working there. How could you criticize that? And here was the money going to the sweepstakes, to the hospitals. You know, how could you criticize that? But what nobody was noticing was the crack in the middle, where all this money was vanishing into, you know, all kinds of tickets and, you know, expenses and smuggling and bribery and, you know, everything conceivable, you know. And it was huge, and everybody knew what was going on. I mean, the people would said it in the Dáil, you know, that this thing was going to turn out into what it did, you know. And at the end of it, the McGrath profits out of it ran, at the time I quoted it, I think it was $400 million they made out of it.
Good
you know,
Lord.
Out of a charity, you know.
My God, $400 million.
Yes.
Which was a huge amount of money at that time.
Absolutely. Well, through the 30s and into the 40s, 50s, and then other countries caught on and started bringing in their own, and slowly it went into a decline.
Joe, we'll take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Sure.
Volkswagen, Mark speaking.
Hi, love, it's me. I found us the perfect au pair.
Great.
Wait till you meet her. She's stunning. She used to be a bikini model in Brazil.
That's nice.
I'm so relieved, especially as I'm going to be away so much. I hope you two get on.
We'll be fine.
Be nice to her. She's just split up with her boyfriend.
If there's one person you can trust, it's an authorised Volkswagen dealer. Every used car's history, mileage, parts and equipment are rigorously checked. Contact your local Volkswagen dealership for details.
Would an estate agent act differently if they were selling their own home? Would they take more care in finding the right buyer, pay more attention to detail, and use the most technologically advanced websites? Well, at ERA Ireland, we sell every house as if it was our own. Our network here and abroad is renowned for its commitment to selling, and we use a 10-point plan to make sure the whole sale runs smoothly. So if you want to sell your house the right way, talk to your local ERA Ireland agent or log on to eraireland.ie. ERA Ireland, always there for the perfect move.
Visit the Declior counter at Cleary's Dublin today for your exclusive gift. Purchase 3 or more products from the Declior range, including Aram Essence Oil of Night Balm, and receive a stylish bag of 8 essential face and body products in handy travel sizes. Call to the Declior counter at Cleary's Dublin until Sunday the 19th of November for this great free gift. 1 gift per customer while stocks last.
These familiar sounds of winter are brought to you as a gentle reminder that every Rubex tablet is packed with as much vitamin C as 20 sun-ripened oranges. When there's an R in the month, reach for Rubex. Read instructions carefully. Rubex. Bless you.
Barotuma Promotions presents an international opera gala with the return of world-renowned Italian tenor Mario Malmini, superb Italian baritone Marzio Giassi, and Maltese soprano Lydia Caruana, with the Pro Arte Orchestra at the National Concert Hall on Saturday 4th of November and at City Hall, Cork on Saturday 18th. Tickets from €20 to €45 from the NCH and Cork Opera House. Telephone booking fee applies. Details on barotuma.com. Sponsored by the Gift Voucher Shop, the Port of Cork Company and the Unicorn Restaurant.
Inner strength is something to admire. Residents of the Anne Sullivan Centre for Deaf-Blind People display great courage and inner strength every day. Please help us to support their determination. Send what you can to the Anne Sullivan Foundation for Deaf-Blind People, 40 Lower Drumcondra Road, Dublin 9. We've got the drive to succeed. Have you got the vision to help?
Dedicated to wood floors? The Wood Floor Superstore showcases over 150 wood floors, including solid, engineered, exotic, bamboo, native Irish, as well as a host of accessories, all in Ireland's largest wood floor specialist store for trade and retail customers. Opening this Friday, October 27th at Dublin's Red Cow Retail Centre. Visit woodfloors.ie or call on 411 222. Wood Floor Superstore, the definitive wood floor display.
I'm talking to Joe MacAnthony, who was the author of one of the finest pieces of investigative journalism in the history of Irish newspapers. That was the Sweepstakes expose in 1972. Joseph, you said that one of the consequences of the publication of that story was that the Murphy family that owned independent newspapers sold the group to Tony O'Reilly.
That's right.
Was the atmosphere then more favourable to investigative journalism once O'Reilly took it over?
Well, what happened shortly when O'Reilly was trying to take it over, the story had appeared in January, and I was doing follow-ups on it. And it turned out that the Murphys had agreed to meet O'Reilly on the possibility, after the story, on the possibility of selling the papers to him. And there was some serious deal moving along. In the meantime, I was doing follow-ups. And Connor called me. Connor
O'Brien, the editor.
The editor. He called me and he said, I wonder, could you come out? We need to talk about something. Tony O'Reilly's been on to me. And I went and met him, and he said, O'Reilly has a deal to buy the independent group. He said, but Paddy McGrath has been threatening. If these stories don't stop, he will buy the group and break up the independent. And so what Connor said to me, O'Reilly asks, would you wait until September when he'll get complete control? He said, Connor quoting him, you can then go after the bastards. So I said to Connor, I had difficulty with this. Connor was marvellous. We were like a team, you know. Every time I did an investigative thing, you know, he was there, he was supporting me, did everything that is necessary to investigative reporting. And you won't find that in newspapers in Ireland, I don't think, today. I see no signs of it anyway. But in any event, I said to Connor, I have difficulty with this. I don't think I can do something like that. So I said, but what, and I was trying to find a way out of the difficulty because of my admiration for him and our closeness. And I said, look, why don't I take time off and write a book, and the Independent can then serialize it, for nothing. Just keep paying me my normal wage. I'll go off, I'll write a book, then you can serialize it for nothing, and that'll make up for it. So that was the thing until September. I did try to sell it, but Gilliam Macmillan refused to accept it. They read material that I gave them, but they said no, they wouldn't do it. And it didn't surprise me because the Swedes had enormous influence in Ireland at that particular time. So in September I went back then O'Reilly had control. And suddenly there was a diminishing of stuff, of the kind of investigative. I had done phone tapping, I'd done exposés of IRA gun running. I had loads and loads of things I had been doing, you know. So it was starting to go downhill. And I think... Anyway, what I can say just at this moment, not because I'm afraid to say it, because I'm not. It's just it doesn't suit me to say some of this at this present time. But O'Reilly decided he wanted to get rid of me.
How do you know?
I'm not going to tell you how I know, but I know he did, and I know it in a concrete manner. Anyway,
did he tell you?
No, he did not tell me. But he did tell somebody else.
Conor O'Brien?
I'm not going to go into where or how or what happened in relation to it. But in any event, taking from that, Conor would not get rid of me. And I had started then on a story on Ray Burke. Which was actually my final story, you know. Imagine having to leave after exposing Ray Burke. What does that say about Irish journalism at the time? And nobody would hire me, you know.
What was the story about Ray Burke?
Ray Burke was taking bribes.
This was in the early 1970s.
It's 1974, yeah. It's Ray Burke was getting land rezoned and getting paid for it, and I found a document which stated that for Ray Burke, for professional services from the company that was buying this rezoned land, that owned this unzoned and then rezoned land, I got a document saying for Ray Burke professional services £14,000. He was caught.
This was land out near the airport, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
My recollection of was that he was involved along with another a Fine Gael person whom I don't want to name because he's dead.
Yeah,
but he later became a minister.
That's right.
But that
I saw him cited as a hugely honest man. I suppose one should only speak well of the dead, you know.
Yeah, but in any event, that they were both members of Dublin County Council at the time. They were involved in rezoning lands, and then they became auctioneers overnight and were involved in the sale of the lands, and they made a lot of money from it.
A lot of money. They were making the problem was the level. I mean, you know, when we talk about these things as though they're new, they're not. They're not new. This kind of carry-on is not new. The thing is, there was no money there for it in the 60s. It was only
no money for what?
No profit, no big profit out of land.
Oh, I see, yes.
You know, so that it wasn't that urgent, you know. It was only as things began to move into the 70s that land started becoming valuable, and then you got the corruption. Would you believe in 1972 I actually I got a tip-off about George Redmond, and I went and interviewed George Redmond in the Dublin Corporation. And it was a wonderful sight. You know, in the corporation at that time, the standard uniform was a worn cardigan, you know, 3-side with pockets overflowing, you know, that kind of appearance. And then I went in to George Redmond, and there was George in at the time, the kind of scandal suit, a mohair suit, this gleaming sky blue mohair suit, and a suntan that would beat the band, you know. This was when I was doing the PV Doyle thing, because I asked him, you know, I questioned him, you know, about, is it true that you've been staying in a resort at the, you know, of PV Doyle, at the expense of PV Doyle, and so on, you know, but I couldn't pursue it at the time. There wasn't enough there, and I had more than enough stories to go around, you know.
But just come back to the Ray Burke thing and the Sunday Independent. That when you started to write about Ray Burke, what happened?
Well, basically nothing. There was no interference with the story itself at all. It wasn't known, though. I mean, we didn't go around, telling everybody what we were about, and I would very much doubt if Conor would pass on that information, But basically what happened, that story came about because of a journalist called Paul Murphy on The Independent. Paul, a great guy. He got a tip and he came to me and it went from there, and we gathered all the information and that, and laid it all out very clearly, but in the course of it we hadn't got the magic bullet. I mean, we knew what it was, what he had been doing and so on, but we were missing the magic bullet. And I decided I would go. I had the habit of doing this, by the way, in my investigative stuff. I had the habit of going to very great extremes in research. I mean, I read all everything mentioning a lottery in the Dáil from 1922 up to 1972 or whatever date it was, in doing the sweepstakes. I went back to ancient Persian times when I was doing the story on phone tapping, and how they used to demand all the tablets that were written on and copy them at these custom stations in Persian, things like that. So I did an enormous amount of background whenever I was doing an investigative story, and I have never been sued. Not once in my life have I ever been sued for all the succession of stories that I've done over my career. But in this particular case, I decided I would go to the company's office. I would take whoever Ray Burke's accountant was and go back through from there and whatever companies beyond that and he had and the lawyers. I just kept going back and back through people in any way connected with Ray Burke. And I was carrying a bunch of files that I had ordered up over to a desk when a sheet fell and just fluttered down to the ground, and I picked it up, and it was that. That was the sheet that said Ray Burke had got this money, and I didn't know what folder it had come out of, but it was the sheet from the thing, from the company, saying 14,000. The bloody lawyer went next to this happened, we published it, and I went on Monday to get another one of them. I had made photocopies of the one I had, but I wanted to get more of good quality. And I went back to the company's office, and this woman lambasted me. How dare you take stuff, and you have no right to be taken. That thing should not have been in, and so on. It turned out that the lawyer for the Dublin Airport crowd, or Ray Burke, I forget which it was, he said in the tribunal that he actually went there, was there before me. He didn't know I was going there. I went there. He got there before me and got her to withdraw the thing and put it away. I mean, you could do anything in those days if you had a bit of clout,
Joe, and that Ray Burke piece in the Sunday Independent caused you to leave independent newspapers. How did that come about?
Well, it wasn't so much that in itself. It wasn't the Ray Burke story that actually caused me to leave. Although, I mean, subsequent events would suggest it should have been. But what happened basically is I was earning in merit money 50% above a senior reporter in the Sunday, or in the Independent generally. And there was a restructure by O'Reilly which brought up, in exchange for different work methods and so on, but brought up the money to where I was. And I then said, well, what about me going up again? They said, no dice. So I was ending up with a loss of 50% in merit money above the senior reporter. I came down to the same rate as a senior reporter, and all the stuff that I had been doing in that appeared to be regarded as, nothing in the circumstances.
You were hardly driven out, though.
No, I didn't say I was driven out in that particular context. What happened to me is I went afterwards to Conor, and I said to Conor, how would you feel if suddenly 50% of your extra money was taken away or disappeared?
But it wasn't taken away.
Yes, there was no more merit money. I got no more merit money.
Right,
I lost it.
Yeah. But you weren't earning any less. But go on anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, but everybody else was earning 50% more.
All right.
I mean,
okay.
But
anyway, what happened? You went to Conor O'Brien. He said what?
And I said to Conor O'Brien, "Give me £2 more, and I'll stay." I didn't want to go. And I said, but this is an impossible position, that I would lose everything, that I would end up in this, that I would lose all the merit money and that it's essentially taken away from me. I said, I don't want to leave. And Conor said, I think it would be better if you went. And I was very upset and angry. And at the time, there was no opening for me anywhere. So when it happened to me, I also had a contract with RTE, and that was another kind of bizarre thing which was happening at the same time.
You had a contract at the same time as you were working for independent newspapers?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a contract. I had signed a new contract. I was kind of on different contracts. The shows kept closing down, and they'd open up another show, But in this one, I had a contract with 7 Days, or January 1st, 1974.
7 Days was the prime time of those times.
That's right, yeah. Gotcha. And I had a 6-month contract with them. It was a part-time thing, for me to do investigative stuff. And anyway, I went in on the first day of the new contract, and when I arrived at the booth at RTE, the security man says, "You can't come in, you don't have a pass." And I said, "It's all right, send on to 7 Days, and they'll send somebody up to bring me in." And he said, so he called, and they said in 7 days, "I'm afraid there's nobody here can take you in." And I said, "Well, will you tell the executive producer to arrange for my check to be sent to my home, and when you send me a pass, I'll come in to work." And they sent the check out every week. Or I'm not sure if it's every week or every month. They sent the check out for the whole 6 months without me doing any work for them.
And never asked you to come in?
No. And by that time, I had some, if you like, some heightened recognition, I was doing these stories, and I would be doing comments on radio and so on. I had a kind of fairly high profile. It wasn't intentional because it didn't help my work, but I had a high profile in that, and these works were well known in that, and to hire me and then not to ask me to do any work, just to pay me without bringing me into work, was pretty amazing to me, So there was an atmosphere of that type, and
did you seek work anywhere else, in the Irish Press Group or the Irish Times?
I asked in the Irish Times, and there was no opening there. I talked much later. I talked to them at different times, afterwards about it. Because what happened to me is I was doing a thing. There was somebody I had known in RTE had gone to the CBC in Canada, and he was making a documentary in Ireland. And he asked me would I write the script for it, because I had written scripts for RTE. And I said, okay. So I was going with them, and the host of the show, a woman called Adrienne Clarkson, who incidentally became Governor General of Canada afterwards. Yeah, but Adrienne said, look, this stuff, she liked what I did, the work I did. And she said, if you were to come out to the CBC, she said you could travel the world, choose your own stories, and you'd work on big ones, you know. And you ought to come out if things are like this here. It was very depressing, you know. I mean,
so you've stayed in Canada ever since?
I did, yeah. I asked different people since then, and nobody would hire me. In fact, you know, here's one of the things. I exposed Ray Burke in June '74. I don't believe that I had a call from Ireland from any media until 1989. I was gone 15 years before anybody, and I did ask, I did go. Yeah.
Why then, I wonder?
I think it was the Ray Burke thing. Maybe it was a bit later than 89.
Ray Burke in 1989.
Yeah, wasn't that the I'm assuming now it was the Ray Burke thing that brought the phone calls.
No, this would have been 1997.
Jesus, then it's 97.
Yeah. I got it's an extraordinary story.
Yeah, it's...
have you missed Ireland?
Oh, greatly. I mean, I have never... I mean, you know, all my interests are in Ireland, you know? I mean, I read the paper every morning and so on and things like that, you know? And I go over quite often, you know? But I have had no opportunity ever or opening to actually work there beyond. I got a year from Angus Fanning, and I don't know if O'Reilly could have known about
this. In the Sunday Independent again, yeah.
That's right, in the Sunday Independent, and it was kind of seeking a little, you know, kind of reputation, because of the reputation that I had, that it would be useful to the paper, and I went for a year, but starts screwing around again. They wouldn't... I did stories on different aspects of corruption. I did one on the facilitators, you know, who are the lawyers, you know, and the accountants who assist all these people. There's no corruption without collusion. And the collusion is from people who are professionally bound, supposedly, to keep to high standards. And they bust them without a second thought. And you see that all over. And that's a thing. Nobody is brought to trial, you know. Nobody ever goes to jail. And that is the root of all corruption, and it is the root which perpetuates. You know, a politician does wrong, a corrupt politician does wrong, like Ray Burke. You go along and you go after him and you expose him, and he sails through it. He is bound not to be more careful. He is bound to repeat the process. And with me, in terms of the investigative reporting, one of the things that always stuck in my mind about what I did is any time it was cut off, I think of what I could have done if I had stayed. I mean, Renix, I can tell you, and the Independent, if I were in the Independent, I would have done Renix regardless, you know. I would have gone and done investigations. I would have gone after Ray Burke.
Just to put this in context, Renix is a reference to the fact that in June of 1989, the company controlled by Tony O'Reilly, that's Fitzwilton, gave a payment of £30,000 to Ray Burke, and subsequently the payment was misdescribed in the Fitzwilton accounts.
Yes, there you go. You know, I mean, that would, if I had, there is a value in investigative work, and I found it particularly when I had gone to Canada. I exposed the security service in Canada, and in a unique kind of different result. In that particular case, they closed down the entire security service, you know? So you got impacts, and people did go to jail and things of that sort when they were caught in corruption, you know, and they raided houses of MPs and even their offices, you know. That kind of thing didn't happen in Ireland. I mean, you look at all of these politicians who had taken money of one way or another. How many raids have the Gardaí done on these people's property? I mean, the FBI does it all the time. The Mounties do it all the time. Why is it never done in Ireland? Why are these politicians free of harm in this way? I mean, that's one of the most absurd and outrageous situations. I would have loved to be able to continue my work there. And not only that, but I even of later years, I thought, I would like to be able to teach investigative journalism.
Well, you should come back and do it, Joe. But Joe,
they won't. Nobody. I mean, they won't allow me to teach in university because I don't have a degree. It's absurd.
I'm afraid I can't allow you to talk anymore because we've run out of time. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting talking to you again, Joe. The programme team tonight was Kieran O'Byrne, Annette Egan, and Andrew O'Kane. From us tonight, good night.
Visit the Self-Build, Extend and Renovate show at Mill Street, County Cork from the 3rd to the 5th of November. From